Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Bubble podcasts. As you guys have heard in the last week as well, I think one of the major things when it comes to AI, everybody is looking for is how do you really get discovered in a world where software is super easy to make, it's super cheap to make, and everybody can theoretically make software. And so, if there is no moat, if you are solving problems for whoever, but you're not getting discovered, what's the entire point, right? And so, I think that has been a major conversation with everybody that I speak to online and offline. And then last week, when we were speaking to Pierre, we really dove deep into the discovery aspect as well. And I thought, why not talk to someone who not only champions that, but seemingly is building the rails for how everything will be discovered in the future as well. Today, we have the co founder of Ghostteam. They have an incredible product called agentdiscoverability.com as well. Elliot Garreffa, I believe, if I've given the correct pronunciation. Elliot, thank you so much for coming in and taking the time out.
Great to be here today. Excited to get into this.
Tell me a bit about Ghostteam and the product that you guys have launched. What do you guys do? What's the thought behind it?
Yeah, definitely. So at Ghostteam, we help companies get discovered by agents. So we help companies to build MCP servers, also MCP apps, and really just make sure that they are visible within the major AI clients. So predominantly across ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini. And within those surfaces, it's actually been a really interesting time because I think most people are familiar with the topic AEO, so answer engine optimization, basically making sure that, whenever a user prompts, there is an answer and you appear in that answer. But it's becoming increasingly interesting within the MCP community where you now can actually have products that get surfaced within those channels after a prompt. And that sort of changes this moat from these things just being chatbots to sort of moving into more of an agent experience and also having a rich UI as well. And so with this new paradigm of there being these app stores, you might have seen ChatGPT apps come out, Claude connectors come out, Gemini has just launched a connector store as well. This actually also just means that there is a new discovery optimization surface as well. And so, when we co-founded Ghostteam a little bit over a year ago, we worked with companies like Stellantis, Manpower Group, Statista, companies like this, mainly major enterprises. We consistently just had the same problem, which was, exactly like you put it. Once I build this MCP or build this MCP app, great, I've got it in the major registries, it's in ChatGPT, it's in Claude. How do I actually get it discovered? And so this consistent pain point that we had always heard really drove us to dive into this topic. And yeah, we've built a platform called agentdiscoverability.com where we help companies to optimize for discovery of their connector inside of those channels. And I'm sure we'll dive into what that looks like in a moment.
So, in terms of, let's say, apps and connectors, I would say that entire ecosystem is so incredibly vast because you have the sort of players that you mentioned. These are largely large scale sort of SaaS companies or tools that essentially have a customer base, and those customers are now interested in utilizing, let's say, agents to do certain things. I'll give you an example. I've been building, let's say, my website, an app here or there, and then I want to use a bunch of different tools that I previously have already used. And now with MCP servers and connectors, I'm able to let Claude do it for me, right? Then there is an entire different world where you have a lot of SMEs, people who may be doing brick and mortar businesses, who may have an extension of their work on digital, or rather, the digital is more like a scheduling or a marketing tool. And then you have apps for those as well, in terms of them being discoverable on, let's say, ChatGPT or Claude and so on. So I want to differentiate between, first of all, these. How do you see the ecosystem of apps? Because right now it's everybody is talking about, let's say, ChatGPT apps, but I would argue these are very two different, distinct use cases to begin with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to your point, these platforms are vast. So, if you think about the use cases, on ChatGPT and really just the volume of ChatGPT as a platform. It's nearly 1 billion weekly active users, and Claude is ramping up massively within the enterprise in particular as well. There are infinite number of use cases that these things are queried upon, and so really there are such a large surface area for opportunity for really any company to begin to surface for certain intents. And so exactly like you said, this is really not just an enterprise game. This is an opportunity really for any business to start to think about, okay, as users are prompting more within these channels, how can I make sure that it's my product not just appearing in the text, but actually surfacing within the chat window to actually get used? And yeah, spot on. That is, a big company thing. It can be an SME thing. Let's say you are a local plumbing service, for example. There is no reason why if someone's saying, I want to, I'm looking for a plumber in my area, that instead of it just saying a list of text, you could actually have, a schedule that plumber kind of UI widget that appears to actually enable them to directly book it without ever having to leave the UI.
So how does that sort of work? And I want to talk about, again, so with the enterprise, I think right now the MCP servers and the connectors and all of those things are coming in as a logical next step, because people are already using them, and then now they're using agents to use them. With a lot of SME though, they're building apps. Those apps are just in shells collecting dust, because right now, and that's my understanding, right now the discoverability has not been baked into a lot of these chatbots or LLMs. And I was having a conversation the other day, and one of the things that gentleman was expecting was that we're right now building the rails for a time when it's really Gemini and ChatGPT and Claude that they'll open up. Right now, we're probably querying still Google, but they'll open up when they have enough apps to just directly start to share those apps with the customers. And that's my understanding is right now the bot doesn't do that. And that's when the discoverability really will become mainstream. Or are there ways right now for the SMEs to be discovered as well?
Yeah, great question. And it's very important to sort of ground the conversation in where we are at with this ecosystem, and actually how does that differ across the different platforms. So when we first got into this, I think what's so interesting about this space is that, for the first time ever, if you compare sort of the evolution that's happened across kind of, I suppose, the history of kind of the internet and technology, you've always had platforms that have emerged and then optimization services that have surfaced on top of that. So you had Google, you had SEO, you had the App Store, you had ASO, you have AI so far, which is chatbots, which is AI citations, and AEO. And now with these new connectors, I think OpenAI, who sort of first came out with their ChatGPT apps, which then later got merged with MCP apps, which is a standard that many of these platforms have adopted, meaning you can build one app and plug it into a number of these platforms, which is great for the ecosystem. When that happened and in their docs, they have really built the ecosystem from the ground up to be ready for not just someone to have to go to an app store, connect an app, and then be able to use it, but actually from the ground up, an app be able to be sort of prompted and then be surfaced. And without getting too much in the technical details for this conversation, they do talk about it a lot within their docs, kind of getting it ready to be set up for that. So we saw that, and I think really just believed in this era that, it's crazy to think that if you can really understand an intent of a user, that you wouldn't actually just create a better experience and just give them the app that they need at that moment. And it's actually an opportunity to create a far better experience, because, in a mobile, you can't understand an intent as well as you can at that exact moment compared to these chatbots. So we expect it to come, but we don't know when it will come for certain ecosystems, because it, like you said, is really a timing thing. And at the moment, ChatGPT, the main way that you can get your app discovered is directly within their registry. And there is some level of optimization that you can do there, in that it's a keyword game. So you can, if you were to, for example, and also just to make sure for the audience, they can sort of picture what we're talking about. Now, if you go to ChatGPT, you can go to a section called apps. And within there, you can connect to an app, let's say booking.com. You could type in hotels, a number of different apps surface. You can connect to Booking. And then when you next type in, I want to book a hotel, you won't just get a list of text. You'll get Booking's app to surface. And so for ChatGPT at the moment, all you can do is try and do some keyword optimization across your app and tools to make sure that you appear when you put in the keyword. What we have seen, though, in other ecosystems is they have moved forward much more quickly on the organic discovery side. So actually, Claude has been the first company or platform to actually launch organic discovery. So if you go to Claude today, they have a very confusingly, I will say, each ecosystem calls them different things. It's very unhelpful. So we have different, whether you call them AI apps or connectors, Claude calls them connectors. If you go to the connector store, you can browse all the different apps, which is great. But actually, if you put in a prompt into Claude without ever having picked a connector, if you went there today and said, book me a hotel for tomorrow night in London, you would actually get a connector picker. So it's a box with multiple different connectors that you could choose, like booking.com, Expedia, etc. And so that is an organic surfacing of your product directly to the thousands of people that are prompting that every day inside one of the biggest AI clients. And so, really, it's the first sort of surfacing of a vision that we've seen for some time. But yeah, Claude is the first one to do it. ChatGPT, and by the way, you can absolutely optimize for ranking there, and maybe we can get into that. And we expect hopefully ChatGPT and others to roll it out as well.
Interesting. I did not know that Claude had an organic discovery thing out already. Gemini is seemingly is lagging because in terms of my personal just run of the mill daily prompting, I had moved from ChatGPT to Gemini. Claude was always more work
Mm.
related, either coding or more professional work. And I think that's my understanding. I'm not a power user, so does Gemini have the connectors and that similar experience? Are they more closer to let's say ChatGPT or Claude in terms of where they're at with this?
Yeah, they I would say are almost, if you were to look at it on a spectrum, Claude's up here, ChatGPT maybe a little bit further behind, but ChatGPT ecosystem is growing much, much faster. We have a tracker of the ecosystem at agentdiscoverability.com/track. You can sort of track all the apps there and the growth of the ecosystem. And Gemini is actually quite far behind in this space. So they did launch at Google I/O a couple of weeks, if not a month ago now, that they are having MCP connectors. And so that is about to roll out, and they do have about sort of 20 or so launch partners that they've talked about publicly. What we don't know at this stage is whether or not those are MCP apps. So, for example, if you were to build one MCP app, you can launch it in ChatGPT and Claude. They may choose their own sort of standard or approach to surfacing the UI layer. But they have said, which is very exciting, that they are moving in that direction. So we will see, apps surface inside Gemini conversations, which is really awesome. And it's amazing because Google obviously has just so much traffic and it's just known for querying. And so for any business, really, it's just like incredibly relevant to be present there. So yeah, in answer to your question, Google is sort of like quite a lot further behind, but is progressing along the journey as well.
That makes sense. I just saw the tracking that you built. It's absolutely phenomenal. I'm curious though, in terms of how you see the vision behind these apps, right? So we had the internet with the search engines and the and let's say the WordPress era, where initially it was a bunch of these very well funded companies that were building these .com companies. There was a boom, then there was a crash,
Mm.
but really, what mainstreamed that entire thing was, let's say, WordPress coming in, creating a standard, and then everybody was essentially on the internet. There was no barrier to entry apart from the technical sort of know-how that was required to set it up. And so you eventually saw hundreds of millions of websites that existed, and then Google being the sort of central engine that would ensure discoverability. Then you had the apps era, that was gate kept. So Android's like the Google Store and the App Store from Apple. And so you did require the technical background, but also you needed to make sure that Apple or Google approved you, and then they were able to then take a fee of everything that you earned as well. Now, with this new, that's my understanding, is this is an extension of the same thing essentially, where any and everyone has to be here. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're going to be on these these mediums, because that's where everybody is going now. How do you see that ecosystem evolving? Do you think it's more going to be like mobile apps, or is it more going to be an open ecosystem, similar to what we saw with search engines?
A phenomenal question. And from what I've seen in the way that I think this ecosystem is developing, I think it'll be more like mobile apps. But I do believe there is a potential for it to slightly open up to be a sort of Google-esque browser directory. And let me kind of explain that in some detail, because I think it's a very interesting question and an important one. So something that we've seen is that from every technology evolution that has come, there are the companies that win are the ones that can own the distribution, and they are the ones that build the biggest ecosystem. And the way they build the biggest ecosystem is by having the users, and also a flourishing third-party app ecosystem and user ecosystem. And the way that you do that is by, in general, attracting developers to come, and you attract developers to come by users, but also by monetization and distribution. That's also why, as part of our thesis, we really believe that they will solve the distribution problem, because there is no incentive to build an app on top of these platforms if it does not get used. So they have to find a way to make sure that it gets distribution. Now, when you then think about how they're going to monetize, these platforms are very incentivized to create a walled garden. So ChatGPT wants every company to build on top of their platform, and they want to take a cut and commission where they can. And so I think that right now we're in sort of a chatbot era where we are seeing these applications get built, and they're used almost as a way for the end user to interact with the application. But actually, I think that and maybe we can get into this sort of as a deep dive at some point. I think we move to more of an agent era, and actually, these applications, in a lot of ways, they move to being not just the end experience for a user, but also just infrastructure for an agent to decide to use when it wants to, without a human ever even knowing. And so, I actually think a lot of the usage and the ecosystem growth is going to come from not just humans interacting with these applications, but these really becoming the infrastructure that agents use at an order of magnitude more scale than we will see today, just from the usage that you get across kind of ChatGPT and Claude. And I think that is not so much theory, other than I think we've actually seen it from some of the evidence that has come out. So, right now, these labs, they're quite focused on these chatbots, ChatGPT, Claude, but they're moving to be more towards agents, Codex, Claude Code. But in addition, Claude actually had a leak of their source code. And in there was a project called Conway. I'd suggest people have a look into that. It's very interesting. Basically, an always-on agent platform where effectively you can build your own agent as part of a community, and then release it effectively to Claude's ecosystem. So a long way to say, they are shaping up to basically try and capture the market and get everyone to build on top of their platform. So I think it will shape up. All of these ecosystems will compete, and I think it will probably look, for the apps at least, more like closed ecosystems. They get everyone to build on top of them, and they take a commission and a cut. However, I do think there is a small potential from a discovery perspective. If we have these app stores get to the size we expect them to get to, hundreds of millions of companies that are there, discovery becomes a very, very difficult problem. And so, how do you surface the right app? It's incredibly difficult. Google solved it. It's a new paradigm here. There is a chance you could sort of see a world where each platform has its own trusted registry, and then sort of a long tail of apps that it allows access to via the web, maybe from trusted registries. However, I think it's a risk, because not only from a monetization perspective, but also from a just trust and security perspective. You can't just allow anyone to connect to any app. That's why you have a registry, not just monetization, but to be a secure platform. So
Does that make sense? I think the trust and security on the vendor side, let's say, where you have to have a verified app out there, because when it comes to an agent, it doesn't really know who the person is. It's just going to go in and get take an app and be able to do certain things. But if I were to flip this around, and I was reading a very interesting tweet the other day of this gentleman saying, he was basically ranting about how it's a weird world where his website is now on a weekly basis is being accessed by millions of agents. So there's no human coming in. It's just agents coming in, crawling stuff, taking bandwidth essentially, and it's costing him thousands of dollars, but with nothing in return, because a lot of these, I don't know, maybe his SEO is really great, so he's surfacing on top, but it's not, nothing's really happening because these aren't really human eyeballs that are getting to know about him. He's just part of an index that takes a lot of content in and then gives a certain sort of summary out to the users. And so what about the other side of the spectrum, where you suddenly now have millions, potentially hundreds of millions of these agents? Technically every individual can have a range of agents themselves out there in the wild, and they're the ones who are now interacting, because that's really sort of changes the way that you even begin to design how you create that sort of that orchestration or the interface layer, right? How do you see the trust and safety, and then overall the experience on that side once the human in the loop is largely out and it's just agents interacting with either your tool, your SaaS, or even your front desk? Because again, it's easy to imagine all of this for SaaS companies, because the agent discovers you solve a certain problem, they pay you, and they utilize your engine to do a certain thing. But for, let's say, doctors and dentists and restaurants, where it's just a front desk that exists to create an appointment or tell you a bit about what services that particular doctor is offering and where, how do you sort of ensure that you're not getting trash appointments that, let's say you're sitting in London and you're getting an appointment from someone in Kenya?
Mm.
How does that sort of work?
Yeah, I think honestly, part of this is that it is incredibly early, and we will sort of see a lot around how, because effectively what's happening is everyone's customer journeys are being ripped up and they're being changed because of the fact that it's agents. And so channels that really worked well before are not going to work well in the future. An example that I quite like is, your ad is never going to be watched by an agent. And so, there are whole channels that just completely change now that you have so many more agents that are there. I think maybe two things I would call out. So there are this sort of goes towards the strategy of becoming headless. And that's a sort of a catchphrase that effectively just means having the right surfaces. That means that agents can understand you and use your product without having any human in the loop. And so typically what that means is having an API, having an MCP, having an MCP app, and having a CLI, and effectively just making sure that you have those surfaces which can be used and understood by agents. Now, as you say, for that's only really part of the problem. We see that as like really step one. You need to build those services so that they can be used by agents. And then actually that's really just kind of like, I suppose, like, the foundation. You then need to actually make sure that they get discovered and used, which is why we're so focused on the discovery challenge. I think that for a company like SaaS, like you say, it's easier in the way because you can kind of really understand how an agent could, let's say, go to your website, and then they can actually understand your documentation, pick up an API, and then use it if they're a dev tool, for example. I think that if you talk about it from a perspective of more of like a consumer product, you sort of have to take a perspective of where are your end users going to be? If you're a dentist, you are trying to actually get humans in the door. And so, you want to make sure that you put your time and effort into the ways that those humans are actually interacting. That's why, like, we, there's many ways that you can get discoverable by agents, but a lot of the agents today, they're just developers in Claude Code and Codex. It doesn't make any sense for a dentist to build a CLI for helping people to build that, book a dentist through OpenClaw. Like, sure, a couple people might do that, but actually you want to make sure that you're really available in the instances that are going to actually get you traffic. So that's why we think for these kind of companies, being ready for agents, it's much more about being in the services where the end users are. And that's why I think, almost to the beginning of our conversation, these SMEs, having a ChatGPT app, having being available in Google, these kind of services are going to be the ones that make the difference for you. And ideally, you need to solve your funnel so that you're not just having a load of bots appear and you appearing in the text. You want to make sure that actually people are either then you're appearing in AEO and people are making sure that they are sort of then going from there to your platform to book, or you are really trying to build the rich interface so that you pop up and can book directly when a human is kind of there in the loop. So it's still a lot of things I think need to be kind of like discovered and explored. But yeah, that would be sort of my advice at the moment.
That makes sense. In terms of the optimization of how do you sort of with SEO, it was very very simple, right? It was like you integrate a bunch of keywords. You basically sort of study what people are searching for. You had that data to begin with as well. I'm not sure if that data is available in terms of what people are querying, let's say on ChatGPT or Claude. And so, really, how do you optimize your discovery or discoverability for these agents? If, let's say, you're just focused on these the frontier models in the main companies, let's say Gemini or Google, OpenAI, Anthropic.
Yeah. So I'll make a couple of distinctions because there's different ways to optimize for different things. So if you want to get found within ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, there's really two levels to this as we define it. You've got AEO, which is answer engine optimization. This is optimizing to appear within the text. There's a whole body of work that fits behind that and how to do that. That includes predominantly similar tactics to SEO, where you're creating content, LLMs like slightly different platforms than SEO typically does, Reddit, LinkedIn articles, etc. But that is one kind of optimization surface. If you actually want your product to surface, get discovered, and get used, it is a whole new discovery paradigm that we call agent discovery optimization. And that is where you need to build an API on your MCP server, get your MCP available within the registries of these major clients. So you have a ChatGPT app in the App Store, you have a Claude connector in the connector store. At that point, you then are trying to optimize to make sure that you can get discovered. And organically, you want to try and start to be surfaced, which is what's happening now in Claude. And so we've run tens of thousands of prompts in Claude to actually backwards engineer how are they organically surfacing connectors. And our advice to companies is the following. You want to, first of all, really define what are the prompts that you want to appear for. So you need to make sure that you understand who is your users, what are the intents, and then you want to set up those prompts to actually start to run every day. And when you run those prompts every day, you start to get an understanding of, okay, how am I actually appearing? When connectors get surfaced for my target prompts, do I appear at all? Do I appear in which order, which rank? And then you start to understand, okay, that's how well I'm actually doing from a visibility perspective. At that point, you then want to begin optimization. And so we have a huge amount of data science that talks to what we believe is kind of the core, I suppose, like core leading factors to that. We're releasing a research report very soon on this topic. And effectively, you want to optimize different components of your MCP server to better ensure that you are appearing for those target prompts over time. And then effectively, it becomes a very similar process that we've seen within the Apple App Store, where similar to ASO, where you are optimizing components of your app to appear better in search terms in the App Store. It's similar here. You will make adjustments to your MCP, and then you will measure the increased ranking over time and how your organic search is appearing. And final thing to say is we expect a very similar thing to be taking place in ChatGPT once they go live for organic. We would expect them to follow a pretty similar approach. So, the tactics that you're learning within Claude, you can sort of, we believe, just cross apply them to ChatGPT, at least for now, to best prepare for organic as it comes on.
Is there a way to identify? I mean, with the age of the internet, or rather early days of the internet, we've had these tools that have tracked the traffic for different websites, that has been able to basically give you a lot of insight on what's working and what's not working. And that was largely because the internet as a system was largely open, and there were different individual platforms that existed on independently, right? So you could just really sort of look at the traffic hopping between them, and you could gather a lot of insight. Now, with a lot of these LLMs, my understanding is a lot of this is locked in to their systems. And so I have no visibility, or anyone could not have any visibility of what's really going on when, let's say, you're exclusively just using Claude and within that ecosystem. Um, and so it was easier to build a lot of these optimization tools for the internet era. But I'm curious, how does one then begin to do that when everything ends up being very, very locked in, and we have not not even any data about how many people have downloaded a particular app or a connector, how many people are actually using it. It's all, we're going by whatever the customer is going to say. We have, let's say, X amount of daily active users or monthly active users. What are your thoughts on that? Is there any data source that's available?
Yeah, I think this is a phenomenal question. And effectively, the issue that you have is that we say that each of these platforms is a black box. And you are basically trying to, that there is a recommendation algorithm because
Mm.
connectors are being recommended. So it basically becomes, how best do you backwards engineer that? And it's a data science problem. You need to have the right tracking and the right experiment set up to best as possible backwards engineer what you think is happening, and then run at scale experiments with optimizations to then determine what is happening. And that can change massively over time, and that will be different per platform. What we have seen so far within the AI ecosystem is that it is possible to get a huge amount of value, even though there is a black box. So the AEO industry is, billions in size by now in terms of sort of market, size overall, and they are, as an industry, all backwards engineering how discovery is actually working just with these citations. And so you can get far without having ChatGPT or Claude tell you, yeah, this is exactly how we're doing it. Now, in answer to your question around sort of the data, I think this is really, really good to know. So because the ecosystem is early, we got about 1,600, a bit more now, ChatGPT apps, about 450 Claude connectors. You have very little access to data. So the way, if you have a ChatGPT app live or you have a Claude connector live, on ChatGPT, natively from the platform, you're told almost nothing. I think you would have seen as well internally, like how little data there is. Very interestingly, 3 days ago, Claude released Claude Observability. So what Claude Observability shows you is, if you have an MCP and it's live in the connector ecosystem, you're able to see things like the total rank. So they will rank every single Claude connector and tell you what your rank is. They will show you things like your error rate and latency. They will show you things like the number of tool calls you've had in total or in the last 30 days. So you're starting to get a bit more understanding of, okay, like, how am I doing? Also, a very interesting thing that they tell you is, where is your traffic coming from across their product range? So you can see, I'm getting this much traffic from Claude versus Cowork versus Claude Code. So that's also interesting. Maybe dev products are, there and consumer over there. So the reason that's also interesting is because it's good that these platforms are coming out with this. On top of that, if you were to use platforms like NoodleSeed, platforms like other hosting platforms, you're actually able to get a lot of MCP analytics. So of course that does tell you, information about it. And I think you can also do some, it helps with kind of painting that sort of usage picture. So there is, in short, some stuff you can gather, but definitely still a lot of work to do to sort of backwards engineer the black box to figure out the organic side for sure.
No, that makes sense. In terms of my understanding is with Ghostteam particularly, you guys work with a lot of clients in terms of helping them come to this part of, let's say, the ecosystem now, where, in my opinion, and I say this with every guest I speak to, I think the biggest challenge right now is a chicken and egg, right? So the chicken is where is the industry developed enough for people to have the FOMO to exist over there, and the egg is where it's so fresh that why should I go to a place where there aren't enough people doing it? So I'm very excited to, in my own sort of businesses and consultations and podcasts, for example, to have a presence on the sort of GEO layer or AEO layer, right? Um, but then I keep on thinking right now, are enough people even there for me to invest in that? Even if if the people are there, I mean, the numbers are staggering. There are billion plus people now using chatbots, but is the discoverability baked into that? And even if the discoverability is there, what's the experience that I build? Because I have a website. Am I basically just saying, okay, just here's some insight about me, and then eventually read out them back to my website? Am I saying I'm building an entirely new app to begin with that just lives on these platforms and nobody ever ends up on my website to begin with? So do I have to rebuild and my entire whatever digital ecosystem that I have over that exists? Um, and so in that sort of chicken and egg, what's your pitch right now to some of these? Because right now a lot of these people are the early adopters. They're the ones, and there's a lot of reward for that as well. Because when you
Mm.
see the inevitability is baked into this. By the way, I have absolutely no doubt that this is eventually happening. So obviously, whoever is brave enough to come in early has the opportunity to gather a much wider market share when sort of the critical mass hits. But what's the pitch right now to the customers? How do you sort of convince them to to begin to invest in this space?
Mhm. It's, I would say, every enterprise you speak to is different, and they have different motivations, and they think about the space differently. We believe that every, depending on the niche you're in, massively depends on, I mean, what we do is we help companies prepare and get ready for the agentic web, right? For agents being available, and us moving towards these AI platforms becoming the new operating system. If you are a dev tool, we will give you a totally different recommendation than if you are a consumer app, or something else on the other side of the spectrums, because frankly you just have completely different services that you need to optimize, right? There's many things that you can do, and actually they're really not relevant for everyone. You have to, our advice is to focus and really optimize for the channels that are important to you. I think you see two things happen with these enterprises. There's a group of customers, the ones that we're working with now, that do take the approach exactly like you mentioned, which are, it is a new surface. They have an innovation budget. It either sits in the innovation budget, or they've already been building with MCP and they understand it. And they are just early adopters and believe in the ecosystem. And their MCP server is clear. And actually, honestly, a lot of enterprises are getting a huge amount of adoption now already, particularly on the sort of more enterprise side than the consumer. That they're very convinced of this. It's more just now making it available in the registries. Does that continue to be interesting? Do they continue to improve the kind of ChatGPT app, Claude connector sort of UI component experience? With other companies that you speak to, there's more hesitation in that they sort of take the perspective of, we will wait and see. And they sort of need to see more traction and kind of use case of the experience to really decide if they want to go in there. I think the best example of this is actually Airbnb. So they sort of publicly spoken about how they have decided not to launch one of these connectors, and the reason being is that they sort of just have a different view on what they believe the conversational UI could look like. I think it really is just a strategic decision at the top of the frame. And, we believe that, launching small, launching early, testing the ecosystem is how you learn. And we've seen that with the best companies that we work with. And frankly, I also think from a discovery perspective, these models learn what they're trained on. And so, we've got companies right now in, that we work with that are getting, millions of calls on their MCP server at Claude. And it's incredible traction. And every single time that happens, the model is learning from using their server. So there is a lot of power from being early. But in short answer to your question, depends on the company. I think both from a sort of like approach as to what's useful for them and their own perspective, but definitely from what we see and also just the success of our own customers, there's a lot of reward, I think, for being early. And if anything, just understanding this space better and then knowing where to focus going forward.
That makes sense. Um, how do you see, and I'm going to bring it out towards a close as well, but how do you see this evolving in the short to medium term? If you can break it down to two different, in the next 1 to 2 years, this is where I see this going. And in the next, let's say, 5 to 7 years, this is what the world will look like. And then tie this particularly with medium term to how you think the ecosystem will evolve over time. Is it going to be largely driven by, let's say, these winners, to, for example, Gemini and Claude, or for example, there are a bunch of these new agent apps that are there to help you with your family, for example, or your work. These agents that are supposed to sort of like enterprise open clause that
Mm-hmm.
that exist to solve a lot of your problems. They're the ones who you speak to, and they'll basically schedule your meetings. They'll pick out a restaurant. They'll um, you know, manage your kids' schedules and so on. Now, these tools themselves could largely be built on the back of the frontier models, but they're working independently in terms of them existing out in the digital world and exploring a lot of these apps and products independently, right? Right now, a lot of these apps and connectors are, that's my understanding, are platform specific, where you build for ChatGPT App Store and then you get it approved and then you go inside there. Is there again, sort of like how websites were, is there a place where, or is there a system that is more agnostic to any platform and largely is built around a protocol that enables any agent, could be an open claw, could be an Ollie, could be anything for that matter, to come in and interact with them and utilize them? And then with a bunch of these sort of agents and the world largely being run by agents where the humans are just um, you know they're just talking to the agent and the agent is talking to everybody else. What does that world look like, let's say, on the medium term to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, phenomenal question. Um, I think that there are sort of two worlds that will likely run in parallel. And they are actually, I think, both of what you mentioned. So, our core thesis is that we believe these core model companies will continue to grow and capture the market. And they will do that not only just by having the frontier models. I actually believe they will continue to be a moat, but open source will become, more prominent than it is today. However, through their harnesses and applications, they will continue to have stickiness and their ecosystems will continue to grow. ChatGPT is the verb, and that is not going away anytime soon. And we've also seen that from the kind of the uptake of Codex and Cowork and Claude Code. These harnesses are incredibly powerful, and we really at the kind of tip, I think, of how big these applications will become. We've seen developer tooling pick up. That is a small market compared to the whole of knowledge work, which I think is kind of the future operating system that is being built. So we think that those ecosystems will really grow. And in short, that what that means is that OpenAI and Anthropic, Google, they become massive. within that world, I also believe that we're going to move from these kind of like chat bots to be more rich, dynamic user experiences with UI. And so there's going to need to be this surfacing of UI components. So therefore, apps become more important. I would also say to your point, we do move towards more of a chatbot to also an agentic world. And so what that means is that rather than you just prompting something and getting a text response, you're actually getting an agent to do something for you. Now, across both this dynamic user experience and an agent to actually do things for you, they need external capabilities. That is how they do things. It is not possible for, ChatGPT to create the best booking experience because they don't necessarily have all of the booking data. They could try and go after that, but I don't think that's the way the ecosystem will evolve. And so these applications that get built over the next 1 to 2 years, I think will increasingly become effectively infrastructure for agents, where that data, those tools, they serve the agents which will begin to, over the years, autonomously pick up those tools. And as long as they're trusted in the registry of these major clients, will then be trusted, as long as the user approves it, to go off and just start to do things, to select which connectors they want. That is why discovery is so, so important, because particularly as top of funnel for B2B, but across the whole ecosystem for B2C, discovery will be massive, particularly when an agent is just deciding autonomously what to select and a user isn't even, in the picture. So I think we will see agents come online. They will do things more autonomously. They will the kind of like applications that we see today in these platforms will become infrastructure of data and tools, and in the last mile serve UI to the end user. I do also believe that in answer to your question, like do we get kind of a more open ecosystem? I do think that we now are in a web where it's used by agents. And when we say used by agents, what we mean is today it's used by agents to kind of read, if you want to think about it like that. And an agent might be being prompted somewhere, and what it's doing is it's broadly just looking at a website and reading the text and then kind of like digesting it to get information. What becomes more interesting is, how can agents actually use the web like a human can, right? We now have Codex and all these platforms that can do browser use. You then get into a world where actually agents will be able to actually use the web, and they'll need to do things like discover, then authenticate, then trust. Trust and authenticate. Sorry, then actually have a good user experience. There's many different steps in the journey, and the web is not built for that. There's new standards that need to be adopted and used, and companies need to approach that. We talk to companies about this and help them prepare for this world as well, all the time. But I think that it is not one or the other. And actually, both will be important and both markets will be prominent. And actually, you can even see it in the way these coding models work now. There's at times when agents want a trusted, easy to access connector from a trusted registry. And there are times when they want to go out to the web and they want to, use, whatever kind of, I suppose, website and product and autonomously connect to it that they want. So, yeah, it's going to, these ecosystems are going to grow big. Agents are going to use these external capabilities as infrastructure. And we will also see the web become more agent ready and usable rather than just readable over time.
That makes a lot of sense. Elliot, thank you so much. It was super, super insightful. I think it's a fascinating time to be in this particular ecosystem because we can at least look at history, and if for those who can read it, you can get a sense of where this is going. It's an inevitability. You can discuss the timeline. You can discuss the route that you'll take to land there. But I think there is a new world being built right in front of our eyes, and for anyone who's part of it right now, it's super exciting. It's exhausting because it changes so rapidly every single day. 10 times a day, and so you have to pivot and you have to really be at the top of your game. But kudos to anyone who is brave enough to be a part of it. Elliot, thank you so much for taking the time out and sharing all that insight.
Massively appreciate it. It's been good fun.
And for all of you guys, let me know in the comment section below. How do you see the overall agentic ecosystem evolving, particularly in the interaction layer, where we're moving away from, let's say, the Google searches and the websites, and offloading a lot of our digital work to these agents? Have you started doing that? Are you using Claude Code and a bunch of these sort of large scale enterprise agents, or are you using some of these more open claw styled open source agents? Have you tried any of those? Let me know in the comment section below. But nonetheless, it was same as Muzammil and Zedi. You were watching Beyond the Bubble by NoodleSeed Studios. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next week.